Welcome to the FNRad Snowboarding Podcast. I'm Eric Charlson.
Wow, this is a great way to climb mountains and come down,
For our reception, our Vulcan buddies brought acid.
I was dropping in and snaking people and causing shit.
I remember calling on the radio, and I'm like, Brushie, where are you?
Craig would do the tricks. He was kind of like the Tony Hawk of snowboarding.
I mean, people just really gravitated to the backcountry.
I liked Craig, but he didn't really care for me too much, because I was a little shithead.
Keith Duckboy Wallace was a pro rider for Burton when their freestyle pro team consisted of 4 key riders: Duckboy, Brushie, Mike Jacoby, and Craig Kelly. And as a member of the product development team, he helped usher in Burton's dominance in the early 90s.
I mean, the first board I ever rode was a Snurfer. I guess it was one of the first Brunswick, just tow rope front, and my local mailman had 2 of them, and he loaned me one of them because he always saw me skateboarding in the neighborhood. So that would be the first board I ever rode. I graduated high school in '88, so that would have been I would have been in junior high. I rode for Chuck. I rode for a company called Glacier Snowboards. There's a throwback for you. Glacier Snowboards was in Reno, Nevada. The guy, and his name actually, interesting enough, was Hal Burton, and he was producing boards in 84, 85, right in there, that were 100% ski construction, full cap construction, centered bases, steel edges, the whole thing. The boards weighed like 6 pounds. They were so ahead of, they actually were the predecessor, built in the same factory where the GNU boys started making all their stuff. There was definitely a time when we were riding for Glacier and GNU came out, and we were basically riding the exact same board with 2 different graphics on it. And no one knows who Hal Burton is anymore. He was a family man and did the snowboarding thing for a while and just kind of faded into obscurity. So then I went to ride for Chuck. Part of the reason I kind of got hooked up was because of Ken and Dave and, Carl, all the Achenbach boys, and traveling with them. And so I started riding for Chuck, and then I wanted to go to all the big races. I wanted to go to the World Championships, and, I qualified for all the events, but I didn't have Chuck didn't have the money to send me, so he actually turned me over to Jake. When I first started, that was right during the Sims-Burton transition for Craig. I almost rode for Tom, too, but that didn't pan out. But since I was from the Northwest, I was sent to train with Craig. And it was Craig's determination, really, whether or not I would be on the Burton team or not. So I went and lived with Craig, rode at Mount Baker, and Craig was my mentor throughout my whole time at Burton. So, yeah, it was Craig, me, Jacoby, and Brushie. We were the core musketeers for a long time. I lived in Mount Vernon with Craig and Kelly Joe at that time. It was every year we'd do early season at Mount Baker, so I lived in Glacier, and then, ride Mount Baker, and then I'd go out on tour all year, and then I'd come back to Idaho and teach for either Ken or, I taught for Craig at Whistler Blackcomb for all the years of Craig Kelly's camp, and then I'd go to Norway, to Stryn, to teach over there for Craig's camp. I did that for 9 years. Go up to Blackcomb, ride every day on the glacier, get off at 1, go down to Squamish and climb till dark, and come back and deal with my campers, and go to Norway. Did that for a lot of years.
Mike Jacoby had told me that Keith gave him the Joker nickname, so I asked him if there was a story behind that.
He gave himself the Joker by being a joker all the time. That was his own doing. Mike was just always life was a game for Mike, so everything he ever did was, he rode hard, and he was very serious about his riding and being an athlete, but he's the guy that would sneak over while you were sleeping on the plane and tie your shoelaces together, or, just anything. He was just constantly playing practical jokes, so I may have called him that, but he earned it.
I also asked the origin of the Duckboy nickname.
Well, it's kind of hard to say. A culmination of standing 15 and -6, that makes you look like you're standing like a duck. I think that's probably where it started. Being a good Idaho hillbilly, being a duck hunter, that may have something to do with it. And maybe big lips.
In the late 80s and early 90s, stance options were severely limited by insert hole patterns on the boards. I asked Keith how he managed to ride a duck stance on old boards that didn't accommodate that.
We didn't ride anything stock back then. Stock didn't exist. They also didn't allow for 20-plus inch stances. That's the advantage of working for the leader in snowboarding is you can make anything you wanted anytime. So most of the time we were riding boards, they were the next year's boards with this year's graphics on it almost always. I mean, it was pretty rare that we'd be riding stock equipment at all, boots, bindings. They may look like it, but Burton was smart enough to allow their team to drive product production,
Team rider input was a key factor in Burton Snowboards emerging as the industry leader. I asked Keith if he had worked on specific products that he remembered.
Oh, shit. Anything from about 1986 through 2000. Every airboard, every Craigboard, every set of bindings, every boot, all of it. I mean, I was on the R&D team that whole time, so having the opportunity to work with, Craig was a master of product development, and the guys that we got to work with at Burton were incredible engineers and designers and were so open to working with us that it was just a cool collaborative time to be able to have an opportunity to work with those people. And the sport was progressing so fast that all the brands and all the riders were, kind of feeding off each other as far as ideas and moving the sport and tricks and coming from the skate background or the surf background or like for us, like it was more the backcountry and mountaineering background. Just there's a lot of excitement and a lot of different ideas during that time. When we all came on, Burton was an East Coast company. So it was perceived as a race company, and it was a bunch of East Coast guys from Vermont. And if you're from the West Coast and a powder rider, you rode Barfoot or you rode Sims. I mean, that was the West Coast. We weren't looked at as a freestyle leader, but that sure changed over the next couple of years with Brushie and me and Craig and Jacoby and Jason Ford, and we started kicking people's asses. So that was a massive change in the way people perceived the brand. So then we had the domination of the racers because they understood ski racing. They came from the East Coast with hard conditions and hard snow. They knew how to build race boards. You had, the European angle because of, Bauer and Nerva and all of our European guys. And then you bought Craig, and all of a sudden they started building boards that performed for freestyle and got behind that movement, and it progressed Burton as a brand. Jake's a smart guy. He's not a dummy. He understood from the get-go to let the athletes drive product development, and if you're true to that, then the brand will do well, and he followed that. Yeah, I mean, he surrounded himself with people that were doing things totally differently, the product designers and the marketing guys that he had working for him, and the way that they ran their team and, the youth program. Like, again, when we were teaching summer camp, all the young kids came to camp. So while we were all coaching, the little freaking grommets of the time, like Terry A. Hawkinson and those kids, we were training them when they were 7 and 8. Same thing with Sean White. He stayed with me at Whistler at camp because he couldn't come because he was too young to be unaccompanied. So, we got to watch those kids come up. We saw the future of what the sport would be because we taught them every summer. And to watch them, teach them a trick and have them one-up you 3 hours later, that was pretty amazing to watch, But that was the kind of progression that the things were happening at that time. So it's different back then, though, because there was no snowboarders. So there were, 3 guys at your local mountain that had a snowboard. So, we competed not for glory and fame and things like that. We wanted to go to other mountains and see other riders, and it was way more of an opportunity to go meet other people in the sport than what people think about as competing. We all did everything. People are like, oh, were you a freestyle rider, a halfpipe? I'm like, we did everything. Moguls, giant slalom, downhill, whatever. It didn't matter what it was because, you were at a contest. You did every event that was there. We didn't have prima donnas that, yes, I'm just a half-pipe rider. We didn't have that luxury. We traveled with 9 boards, and we rode downhill and slalom and GS and a mogul contest, and we rode freestyle, and you did everything. That was just the way.
I asked if teaching kids like Sean White to snowboard gave Duckboy the foresight to see snowboarding getting into the Olympics and becoming the mainstream sport it is today.
No, I think it's a double-edged sword. I don't think that we ever expected it to, nor I think deep down for people like me, I don't think we ever wanted it to. Snowboarding was was never designed to be that. It was the anti-establishment back in the day, and it was about riding with your friends and, one-upping your friends doing tricks. When it gets to the point where it's, although a lot more dangerous and a lot more extreme, to use the most horrendous term ever, when it turns into a spin contest and all they do is drop into the pipe and do 1080 to 1080 to 1080 to 1080 to 1080, back-to-back spin fest, you might as well just get on ice skates. I never saw it as being that competitive sport. I was genuinely shocked when it started looking like it was going to go to the Olympics. I was really surprised. I didn't think it would. It's a good and a bad thing, It's brought a lot of notoriety. We saw it when it started blowing up and it was everywhere, and when it goes from never seeing a snowboard anywhere, even on a mountain, and then it's every commercial and from the Wrigley commercials to everything, and every corporation wants to throw a snowboard into their commercial somehow to try to appeal to that group. For us that were riding in the early 80s, it kind of lost a bit of its luster at that point. Before Burton was successful as a company, they had to create a market. So the first order of business was spend your own money, travel to all the ski areas, and teach them about snowboarding. Teach the ski school about snowboarding. Go to the rental shops and try to explain to them what's going to happen in the future. And you know what I mean? Like, you had to create a place to even sell your products to. It wasn't just like, again, that some of these kind of brands that came on after the big push is that, okay, now the market's established, I just have to create a product and sell into it. Well, they had a lot easier road than the early pioneers did with Chuck and Tom, and there were quite a few companies that were participants in building the sport, not just capitalizing off of the fad that was snowboarding at the time. My dad drove me to Canada, drove me to wherever I wanted to go. I mean, all the events that I went to, the old, 86, 87 Boreal events, all Norquay and Sunshine Village and, all over Oregon and Washington. I mean, he drove me everywhere to go to those events. So I got lucky because I got hooked up pretty early that I had an opportunity to go and travel. I feel incredibly fortunate that Burton, for me, I spent pretty much my youth, snowboarding one way or another between summer camp and riding in the winter. That was 15 years of my life straight. So I never went to college, but that working for Burton, and then I went in-house, I worked in-house in Vermont, and then I was a sales rep for Burton. So that was college for me. I learned, business and marketing and R&D and product development and branding and finance and sales, all that I learned at Burton.
The influence of Craig Kelly on snowboarding is still being felt to this day. Burton's R&D factory is named after him, and the Kelly Mystery Air was the first rideable reissue from Burton. Keith and Craig were close friends for years, and I asked Keith if he could talk a bit about his friend.
Even if you rode for a competitive company or whatever, when you have someone that holds themselves to a higher standard of professionalism and not behavior, because you think the Joker was the Joker. Craig was the biggest joker of all of them, but he was smart enough that he never got caught. We all got caught. He never did. So, you can't help but respect him. It is what it is. He was the man. He was, Elmer was the man. And whether you liked it or not, there was a part of you that aspired to be that guy or ride like that or be that professional, without a doubt. If anyone tells you in our sport that they didn't look up and respect Craig, anyone says they didn't, they're lying, for sure. Craig dug me out multiple times, at least twice when I for sure should have been dead. For sure. Like, without a doubt, I was already pretty much counting the minutes, and Craig dug me out. So for Craig to die in a slide, it just wasn't, I couldn't see it. It took me years. Until the day that we filmed Let It Ride. I'm getting all choked up. It was just a crazy, crazy deal. But I remember being there and having them turn on the camera, and they asked that question, do you remember where you were the day Craig died? And I lost it. Like, for whatever reason, it just all, came back at that moment. In general, I think they did a good job, and I was pretty proud of the finished product, and I don't think it did Craig or Craig's life a disservice. Trying to take on the heavy load of trying to retell someone's story is tough, so I thought they did a good job.
Keith is one of the many early greats of snowboarding that pursued a career elsewhere. Everyone's got a different threshold for change. I mean, imagine being one of the 4 key riders for Burton. I just looked on their website. They've got 19 pros on their trimmed-down team. Imagine getting to bounce your ideas off Jake in a helicopter on a team photo shoot. Imagine going to a resort and teaching the resort staff what snowboarding is. How do you get in a 45-minute lift line and wait patiently after that?
I think when I got out of it, I spent 15 years straight doing it. I ate, slept, breathed the sport in Burton for so long. And, when the sport changed, and this is dating yourself being an old codger, but when the whole hip-hop, super wide 32-inch stance and pants hang to my knees and jibber whole scene came into snowboarding, I pretty much was over it at that point. Because I'd worked my ass off to get on ski areas in the country. And, we built the sport. So when things really turned around, my time was done. Like I was done. I was over it. I learned to telemark ski.
From the very beginning of lift access snowboarding, snowboarders had a reputation for challenging ski resort operators and staff. The rules and soulless technical side of skiing pushed the young generation of the time to rebel and learn to snowboard. Duckboy was certainly no exception.
We were punks. Yeah, whatever. You get me and Palmer and Rankwit and frickin' all those jackasses together at the same time. Yeah, there was definitely times where we were less than gracious. But I would say when things became mainstream, I refused to play the don't you know who I used to be game. I buy snowboard equipment. I don't get free equipment. I could probably call Jake up today. I babysit his kids for years. I know Jake and Donna on I could go to the Burton party every year if I wanted to. But that was then, and this is now. And I just, I love it. I'm beyond proud that I've got to be a part of it. It's not 100% my identity of who I am now. It's like it built me. And it created who I am. There's not a day doesn't go by that I use things that Craig taught me about business to this day. But I don't want to ruin it. I got to experience it at that time and at that moment. And, when I started going up and seeing 4,000 snowboarders at my local mountain and every ski shop and every mountain has a terrain park and everything, that's great. I'm glad to see the sport progress like that. But I don't want to ruin my memories of it. How's that for an old man statement? That's classic. I should say, I'm just being an old crusty codger, and that's lame because they're getting to ride, and if they get to experience it, and when we started, that's all we ever wanted was an opportunity to ride and that feeling. So in some senses, I guess I shouldn't be that old man yelling at the young kids, for their music being too loud and their freaking rap music and, good for them. I'm happy to see where it was. I get a smile and say, yeah, you don't even know. You there, little young snowboard brat. You have no idea because I've ridden with the best. The kid you watched on TV win all those gold medals, yeah. I've helped him tie his boots on, yeah. If you take what you love and you make it your job, there's no quicker way to ruin it. I refuse to work in the fly fishing industry because I love it too much, and I don't want to ruin that. For so long, I didn't want to see a snowboard. You couldn't have paid me to get on a snowboard. Like I said, I learned to telemark ski so I could be a rookie again, and I could go out there and crash all day and laugh about it. I've ridden so many days compared to most people in so many crappy conditions that unless it's like Bluebird sky and 30 inches of new snow and I got a free lift ticket, I'm probably not that motivated to go. I hate to be that much of a baby about it, but I don't get enough days off anymore I'm surely not going to go up and ride in the fog in refrozen, crusty crap snow. That's not going to happen for $70 of lift ticket. That's not going to happen for me. But I'm also not going to call up my old ski area and tell them, don't you know who I used to be, and you should give me a free ticket, and I'm not going to do that either. So, like I said, I feel very honored to be a part of the crowd that I was. I look very fondly back at, my heroes, Evan and Chuck and Tom and Jake and Terry Kidwell. Those were the guys, man. I remember those days watching all the old skate videos and Animal Chin and, the Pal Peralta days, that was there I grew up in. So I look very calmly, and I'm very proud to have been a part of it. It's a good thing.
And of course, I had to ask about Brushie.
Brushie was an East Coast rider, so for a long time he just, like I remember we were catboarding somewhere in Montana. It was like pristine conditions. I remember calling on the radio, and I'm like, Brushie, where are you? We're catch the next cat. It's killer. The snow's so great, and it was like, rub-a-dub-dub, I'm in the hot tub. He was like, had no desire to go ride with us. He was already in the hot tub for the day. It was classic Brushie,
If you want to see Keith Duckboy Wallace shredding in his heyday, watch the original Burton Chill movie. It's awesome, complete with Burton-themed songs and Brushie's famous rap. It's one of the best. I asked Keith about filming for Chill.
We filmed so much and got an opportunity to ride so many days. If I watched it now, I'm sure I would be able to be like, oh yeah, I totally remember that day, and where we were and the circumstances. That's probably one of the fun things for me, is being able to look back and remember where we were and what mountain that was and what the circumstances around that trip were. But offhand, I can't remember which one it was. I'd have to look. I'd have to be watching it.
Thanks, Keith Duckboy Wallace, for doing an interview for our show. And thanks for your years of dedication to snowboarding. Be sure to come back and join us next week for another episode of the FNRad Snowboarding Podcast, brought to you by BR Productions.